So the PC version of Final Fantasy XVI came out this week, and if you didn't know there even was a Final Fantasy XVI already, or if you just forgot that it released well over a year ago on PS5, well, you're probably not alone there. The game came and went without making much of a fuss, and Google Trends data bears this out. Comparing it to the previous two single-player games in the series, 16's launch was a minuscule blip. This might be somewhat surprising, because on paper, it looked like the stars aligned for Final Fantasy XVI's production. And the role of producer was Yoshi P, the man credited for leading Final Fantasy XIV's impressive turnaround following its disastrous beginning. Capcom veteran Ryota Suzuki was brought on and tasked with overhauling the combat system, drawing on his experience working on titles like Devil May Cry 5 and Monster Hunter World. Lastly, 16 would take a page, or maybe more than just a page, from Game of Thrones, aiming for a more mature dark fantasy narrative. There's a ton of promise here. So why exactly did Final Fantasy XVI fail to make a splash? One factor may be the difference in marketing from its predecessor. Leading up to its launch, Final Fantasy XV unleashed a multimedia blitz with a feature-length CG movie, a tie-in anime series, and perhaps the most conspicuous product placement campaign ever seen in a video game.
And if you take something already delicious like cup noodles and add in the finest, freshest ingredients, what do you get?
The ultimate flavor experience.
You too can enjoy the FF15 experience by slurping down instant noodles sitting on your consumer-grade camping gear that you pulled out of the trunk of your $470,000 Audi?
One of these things is not like the others.
So, okay. In comparison, Final Fantasy XVI was marketed quite modestly, competing in a year full of critically acclaimed and popular games such as Baldur's Gate 3. But I don't think that can entirely account for why FF16 faded into relative obscurity. The issue is that the game itself just didn't generate the same amount of conversation as either Final Fantasy XIII or 15. Now, to be clear, this might be a point in 16's favor because, well, you know what they say about bad publicity. I personally have not played either 13 or 15, so I haven't formed an opinion about either. But I've definitely heard a lot about both from others, and most of that was not good. 13 is still derided to this day as a hallway simulator for its extreme linearity. 15 was an immensely troubled production, spending 10 years in development hell, and it's obvious that much of its planned content wound up on the cutting room floor. Final Fantasy XVI doesn't have any egregious flaws like its forebears, which is certainly a good thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything remarkably well either. It explains why this game just didn't make much of an impact. A synopsis of, it's alright, is just not going to engage people or provoke discourse. Perhaps that's what's so damning about this game. It's exceptionally average to the point of being forgettable. What went wrong then? Well, I was thinking about enumerating all the ways this game falls short, something like 16 ways Final Fantasy XVI screws up. But no, I think I can condense my diagnosis down to one sentence. What ails Final Fantasy XVI is a lack of focus. This lack of focus shows up in two interconnected ways. Firstly, FF16 simply tries to do too much. It bounces around between a bunch of different plot points, characters, gameplay features, etc., without giving any particular one sufficient time or attention. Now, as someone with ADHD, I can empathize. I launch into disjointed tangents all the time. It reminds me of that time when series director Hironobu Sakaguchi said in an interview,
2 hours later.
Where were we? Oh yeah. Secondly, when I talk about FF16's lack of focus, I'm also using focus as a photography metaphor. So many parts of this game just seem blurry or vaguely defined. Not in their literal visuals, mind you, but they lack creative depth and detail. You can often pick out or identify something potentially exciting in the game's metaphorical out-of-focus picture, a hint of an interesting story beat, an unconventional bit of characterization, the makings for a super fun mechanic. But FF16 never seems able to bring such promising components into clearer focus and to fully realize them. This ties back to my first point. Because the game is trying to juggle so much, it can't dedicate enough screen time or production effort to satisfyingly develop these ideas. And to give you an idea of how bad this is, my playthrough took about 35 hours and I was only doing the main story path and almost no side quests. That's a lot of time, content, and corresponding production hours to somehow not come up with anything exceptional or memorable. To see what I mean here, let's take a closer look at how this lack of focus impacts the various elements of the game, starting with the combat. The comparisons to Devil May Cry are obvious and not unfounded, and Final Fantasy XVI nails the basics of this frantic hack and slash formula pretty well in my opinion. The devil is in the details, though. One of the biggest areas for improvement that I see involves the various elemental abilities you gain as you defeat bosses in this game. Oh yeah, Clive is a bit of a Mega Man. I put elemental in quotes there because Final Fantasy XVI ditches the franchise's usual strengths and weaknesses approach to elemental magic. I should stress that I don't necessarily have a problem with that decision. I can easily see the logic behind it. To be specific, you can only carry up to 3 of these elementals on you at a time. So I don't think the developers wanted players to worry about forgetting to bring the right elemental in or feeling the need to constantly adjust their loadouts. The developers' intent appears to be to provide a good number of options such that the player can pick and choose what attacks and abilities work best for them. Again, this makes complete sense. The problem is that there are 8 of these elementals, and I don't see enough of a difference in terms of gameplay between most of them. For a good chunk of these abilities, the only thing differentiating them are what colors, particles, and visual effects they use. Now, admittedly, that's a crude and somewhat uncharitable take on my part, but when I was trying out all of these abilities, I just couldn't shake that most of them felt extremely interchangeable. This is made more frustrating when tiny little hints of different playstyles pop up here and there, hinting at something greater that never actually pays off. For instance, the Earth Elemental has the unique ability to block attacks. It also has more of a heavy feel to it, with slow but powerful attacks with lengthier windups and cooldowns. This was more of what I wanted to see, something akin to the original God of War games where each weapon feels unique and has a distinct role, such as being more effective against certain classes of enemies while being worse against others. There's some other elementals that have unique characteristics, but you don't get those ones until way late in the story. At that point, I was locked into a loadout that was already quite effective for me, and I didn't see much benefit in trading out my abilities. This was further reinforced by the skill tree, where I already invested a lot of points into my present abilities, entrenching me even further. I also just didn't come across any threat that might compel me to change my approach at any time. It's this lack of depth and genuine variety that is really the biggest problem with Final Fantasy XVI's combat. For the first 10 hours or so, this new combat system was really cool, but it didn't grow or evolve as the game went on. Frequently, it felt like the only way the game could increase the difficulty was by making enemies damage sponges while also upping their attack power to absurd levels. A note to any new game designers out there, if you find yourself needing to do this, you probably need to go back to the drawing board on either your combat mechanics or your encounter designs. In short, combat became repetitive, button-mashing monotony not even halfway through the game, and the supposed wealth of options turned out to be pretty superficial. And it's not just the combat. Final Fantasy XVI's lack of focus is a pervasive problem across all of its aspects, none more so than the narrative, in my opinion. Starting with the tone, 16 is trying to be a more grounded story by largely mimicking Game of Thrones. Truth be told, I'm conceptually on board with a Final Fantasy game that really focuses on interpersonal drama and political intrigue. That sounds pretty cool. And you know what goes perfectly with this serious, mature storytelling approach? Big dumb kaiju battles. Let me be clear here. I'm not saying you can't or should never attempt to fuse these two genres together. That's what creativity is all about, right? With enough ingenuity and effort, you can definitely emulsify seemingly clashing tones into something compelling. It's that ingenuity and effort part, though, where I find Final Fantasy XVI to be lacking. It's jarring that it wants to engage in these political realities and closer character moments, but then puts those on hold for about an hour at a time while it plays out the fantasy genre equivalent of a pro wrestling match. This oil and water combination stands out even more when the game feels the need to sit you down for exposition lectures on its geopolitics, which... Tonal whiplash is certainly a problem here, but the bigger issue with Final Fantasy XVI's story is that it has commitment issues, specifically in terms of overarching plot and theme. Early in the game, we learn about the plight of the bearers, individuals born with magical powers, and in 16's world, these bearers face bigotry, prejudice, and slavery. So then we run into the coolest character in this game and get recruited by him for his mission to free the slaves. Okay, pretty awesome premise to say the least, though not without some clunky unintended metaphorical implications. Well, wait, hold on. Now the story is about crystals, the other source of magic in the world, which turn out to be accelerating the destruction of the environment. But control of these crystals is a source of economic and political power, so the rulers of the world are disincentivized from addressing or even acknowledging this problem. Man, this is wild. I wonder what it's like to live in such a world. Our heroes conclude that they must take radical action to disrupt this energy source in order to save the planet, even if that will make them pariahs in the eyes of most people. That sounds like a reliable setup for some character conflict and heroic tension. Plenty good enough that I really don't mind that you might have done this before in the series. But the whole free the slaves business, that's on the back burner now. But hold on again, here comes another plot development. So forget about the climate allegory and definitely forget about the liberation of the bearers. I really don't feel the need to get into it here, and I'm also trying to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, so I'll put it this way. Now our overarching plot is pretty much just a rehash of Final Fantasy IX. The lack of focus is palpable here. The moment that you find yourself starting to get invested in the stakes or the meaning of the story, it changes without any significant resolution to prior goals. And in the end, all these themes and plots just feel half-baked as a result. The characters don't fare much better, I'm afraid. And you can probably guess what the issue is. We have a ton of characters in this game, friends and foes alike. And despite the 35-hour runtime, each character just does not have enough screen time to develop or to show us any depth. Worst of all is our main character, Clive, who spends way too much of this game having the personality of a dry mop.
Fine.
I know I said Final Fantasy XVI didn't have any egregious flaws earlier, but no, I just remembered something and I need to take that back real quick. The quest designs in this game are, at least from what I experienced, really bad. My breaking point was a set of mandatory fetch quests in the middle of the main story to find and build ship parts. These are just so boilerplate, so rote, so unimaginative that I'm not sure these quests would make the cut for a modern MMO. And this is a complaint echoed by other folks who have played 16. Simply put, the game doesn't respect your time. With main story quests overstaying their welcome, I naturally had to hard pass the side quest. If I missed anything cool in terms of characterization or story beats as a result, well, sorry not sorry. As a designer, you really can't get mad if the player skips your optional content when your required content is dull and tedious. All in all, nothing ever seems to come into focus for Final Fantasy XVI. The result is an unremarkable game overall, in more ways than one. And that's a shame, because this is a competently made game, and it looked like it had all the right ingredients to become something phenomenal. I, for one, was hoping the series would find its stride again after apparently wandering the wilderness since Final Fantasy X, which came out 23 years ago. Anyhow, this has been Infernal Reviews. Be sure to subscribe to get more reviews and game design analysis every week. Thanks for watching, and catch you next time.